Welcome to this first video, or as I call them, flipped lesson, which introduces us to the 17th century literature from the European side. Now, for a couple of weeks already, we've been looking at Native American creation myth and how that represents the cultural ideas and worldview of the different groups of Native Americans. The second part of this unit transitions us into the 17th century set of literature. So be sure as you watch this video to take notes and to do those things that you need to do to make this ready for your notes. Good day. The focus of this particular flip lesson is to give you the opportunity to take some notes on what was going on at the beginning of the 16th and 17th century that so influenced European travelers and writers to really bring about a unique form of what we now call American literature. We know this started with the exploration, and that before this time there were no such writings where the explorers sat down and cataloged the daily events that they were going through, where they recorded personal feelings, where they did all kinds of different writings that we now look at and say, hey, what were they really trying to do? So as we take a look at this particular video, and I'm going to adjust my screen here just a little bit so I look larger than life, see, that I want to give you some notes. So I have mine off to my right here, so you're going to see me looking over there as I'm doing the recording. So we know that in the 16th and 17th centuries, especially in Europe, roughly 1501 to about 1700, this was a point in time when the literary front of the New World began to sort of emerge as this brand new place for authors to kind of put forth their ideas. We know that the literature of this time reflected the cultural attitudes, the worldview of its particular explorers. So it's not very surprising then that the ideas of the church, that the ideas about European superiority, the ideas about what and who the natives were, these were all concepts that the Europeans had a huge bias about, and because they had a huge bias, they incorporated these ideas into some of their writing. So when we look at what was going on, and I'm at about 2:15 right now to give yourself kind of a mark of how I plan this. So we know that the frontier of exploration was extremely important to the monarchs of Europe. So, for example, in Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella were very interested in expanding Spain's sort of footprint in the world. And they sent explorers out to do a lot of discovering so that they could come up with a way to justify their presence and their expanding presence on the planet. So we know that Ferdinand and Isabella sent Christopher Columbus off in search of a trade route that would cut the amount of time and therefore hugely reduce the expense for trading with the East. Columbus happened to just land on or discover what became the American frontier, the American continent. We know that an explorer by the name of Thomas Harriot, H-A-R-I-O-T, he wrote a work called The Brief and True History of Virginia. Now, there's a very bizarre spelling for it, but it is The Brief and True History. I'm just looking at it over here. The Brief and True Report of the Newfound Land of Virginia. So it is the Brief and True Report of the Newfound Land of Virginia. It's the only thing that Thomas Harriot ever published, but in this thing he catalogs the discoveries in natural resources, in tradable goods. He even catalogs the type of people that he comes in contact with as he's doing all of this exploring. We know that he was an expert in navigation, and he was sent to Roanoke Island. Now, you know that this is the first British settlement located in present-day North Carolina. You also know that Roanoke and everybody there somehow disappeared, and it's a great historical myth. Thomas Harriot got involved with helping Sir Walter Raleigh, R-A-L-I-E-G-H, by teaching Raleigh how to navigate more efficiently across the oceans. So, what do we have here? Just as a brief recap, we have an expanded role of the English and the Spanish and the Portuguese and all of these large, rather wealthy countries searching for new ways to navigate the oceans and to cut down on their economic expenses. We had said in class last week that the three major reasons for pursuing colonization, exploration, was God, to spread Christian religion, glory, to go out and say, I'm better, look at what I've done, very much Columbus's case, and gold, to discover as many possible natural resources as they could, to basically lift that and take it back to England. So Thomas Harriot is very much going to be sort of involved in all of that process. A little more information on Thomas Harriot. Another sort of benefit of what Harriot was trying to do was the construction of the first accurate maps of the east coast of North Carolina. Remember, a lot of these navigators had no idea what they were doing. So for Thomas Harriot, who was a skilled map maker or cartographer, this became a very big deal. So portrayed on the illustrated edition of Harriot's A Brief and True Report of the Newfound Land of Virginia, the maps become the new standard for accurate cartography of this then unfamiliar land. So, I've mentioned a couple of people. Thomas Harriot, who is known for his map making, and that's what makes him famous. Christopher Columbus, because we know that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and mistakenly, accidentally discovered the New World when he was searching for a quicker and more efficient trade route. So a lot of these things are going to matter. Now, when we look at historical events that influenced 17th century exploration, when everything was done, the experiences and events that people endure find their way into the history books. This, again, is what we call bias, B-I-A-S. The authors get to choose what they include in the work. So if they're including how they're heroes, how they are specifically terrific navigators, that's because it's important to their ego to do those such things. So these significant historical events are often catalysts for writers to generate great literature. From exploration to new settlements, the 16th and 17th centuries were wrought with historical events that produced fantastic pieces of literature. All this new exploring led to all kinds of new writing. So Columbus, Cabeza de Vaca, Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca, who gets stranded in Texas, all the way up to the Puritans, who come over on the Mayflower, very much in the same sort of exploration narrative vein that the original Europeans came over. These are always important things for us to think about as we go. Seems to make sense. So you want to kind of keep those ideas in mind as you're generating notes and ultimately on Tuesday and Wednesday going through and doing this reading. So going on a little bit further here, because I'm only at the 8-minute mark. An important distinction to recognize when considering the literature of the 16th and 17th century is that the first American piece of literature did not appear until the work of John Smith in the early 17th century. Everything we're going to do prior to that is European influenced. So please don't lose sight of that as we begin our study of American literature. These colonists brought with them a well-established and highly polished literature. Early American authors relied heavily on this English model, and a huge piece of that English model was the Bible, in particular the book of Genesis and the New Testament, where Jesus emerges as the sort of leader figure of the new group. Sorry, kind of ran out of words there. So during the 17th and 18th centuries, new printing methods enabled the masses to purchase literature at more affordable prices. Although there was now a greater ability for the common person to think critically about literature, their options were ultimately guided by other influential factors. So, what changes in the 16th and 17th century? There is now a massive increase in the amount of people that are exposed to reading. So, what's unique about this American colonization is we're bringing more and more people over who are literate. And because they're literate, it often affected how they could pioneer something new in the new world. Although there was a greater ability for the common man to purchase the other influential factors, people received and perceived literature in the 16th and 17th centuries with the influence of religion, explorers, and something new I'm going to do this year, the role of women in this early formulation of material. So again, what influenced the European settlers the most? Religion, the attitudes of the explorers, and sort of a propaganda piece, and the role of women and their sort of exposure. Because often the women were left behind while the men went off, returned to England, those kinds of things. Now I realize that I'm at about 11 minutes and 16 seconds with this particular video. I have one more piece, so I'm going to try and get this to about 13 and a half minutes. When we talk about the influence of religion, in Christianity, the Bible was and still is an important piece of everybody's sort of daily exposure to religion. Christians took advantage of the printing press and were able to print the Bible in great numbers. The commonality of the Bible influenced the general masses' opinions and thus influenced how they received and perceived other types of literature. So at the very core of what the Europeans brought with them was the idea that the Bible was the most important book, the most important piece of literature that they could ever be exposed to. So the stories, the parables in the Old Testament, were not parables. They were instead factual representations of God's work in the world. So just think about that for a minute. The influence the stories, the parables in the Bible are going to have on the consciousness of the everyday traveler. So I think that's incredibly important. The 16th and 17th centuries were also an exciting time for exploration. The Europeans and Americans were fascinated with the new discoveries that the explorers were making and wanted to read about their adventures. So there's a certain level of curiosity that influenced why exploration narratives were so popular. So today, and again 13 minutes in the video, I want you to take notes on this. But your reading is going to be the first voyage of Christopher Columbus. That's in your hypertext. Make sure you gather that and you read this hypertext for Tuesday so that you're ready to go. I know I'm pushing you a little bit at 15 minutes worth of video plus a reading. I think you're going to be okay. So if you can do these things, you should absolutely be good moving forward. So I'm going to end this particular video right now so that you can continue to prep for your other classes and that you don't have too many other things to do. Make sure you take your notes, and I hope you watch this video all the way to the end. So with that, we'll see you soon.